A blinding flash split the night sky in rural Ohio as a massive blaze erupted at the home of Bill and Kay Wood. Firefighters arrived within minutes but were overwhelmed by the flames, calling in backup to get the towering inferno under control. The next morning, searching through the ash and rubble, they found Bill's body. He hadn't died in the fire, though, but had been murdered before it began. Kay's whereabouts were unknown, and she had seemingly vanished. Police were then faced with both a homicide and a missing persons investigation, though with each discovery, things would become more confusing. The couple's truck was gone, found later at a luxury apartment complex nearly 200 miles away. While it was initially theorized the vehicle had been stolen after the fire, witnesses placed the truck at the complex before it had even begun. A composite sketch showed the image of a potential suspect, but his name continues to elude authorities, as does Kay's fate and whereabouts. Nearly 10 years later, and the chaos and confusion of this atrocious crime haunts the family as well as investigators. Who would target the elderly couple, described as caring, kind, and compassionate, and for what reason? Had robbery been the motive? Was the fire set to cover up evidence of the murder, the abduction, robbery, or all three? Had this been random, targeting an elderly couple with little hope of defending themselves, or was it possible they had been victims of someone they had known and trusted? This is Trace Evidence, episode 163, The Murder of Bill Wood and the Disappearance of Kay Wood. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today we examine both a murder and a disappearance unsolved for nearly 10 years now. Before getting into the case, just a few notes about the show. Trace Evidence is a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and disappearances. You can follow the show on social media on Twitter @TraceEvPod, Instagram @TraceEvidencePod, or by searching Facebook for Trace Evidence. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting some Trace Evidence merch, there's a Patreon at patreon.com/traceevidence, or you can donate directly via PayPal. Visit trace-evidence.com for all social media links, donation options, and contact information. You can submit case suggestions through the website or email me directly at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. Bill and Kay Wood had lived full lives before coming together and getting married. Two families blended together, and for 3 years they celebrated their joy and love. Then, one horrible night, in the aftermath of a fire, a terrible mystery began and has remained unsolved nearly a decade later. This is episode 163, The Murder of Bill Wood and the Disappearance of Kay Wood. Hours after the sun slid beneath the darkening horizon, the heat of that summer day continued to burn hot across the star-spattered sky. Beyond the glow of city lights, a thin stretch of concrete and asphalt split through the rural landscape, a long gray line climbing its way north through fields of green and brown patches of overturned farmland. Darkness settled in quickly, swallowing what little light glimmers from the windows of homes spaced out here and there along the highway, until even the horizon is lost in the endless shadow of night. Quiet, calm, and peaceful, the serenity of a rural homestead interrupted only intermittently with the rushing sound of an engine, the passing glow of high beams, and the red aura of taillights. On this night, though, there was something more. A thicker darkness moving across the night sky like the gathering of storm clouds. It hung heavy in the air, drifting on light winds as they sailed in from the south. Janet Michaels sat on her couch watching late-night television as her eyelids fell heavy. Then she smelled the scent of smoke, drifting in through her windows as it slowly moved past her home. Worried, she hopped up quickly and moved out the front door, making her way down the stairs. Glancing around to the home surrounding her, she couldn't locate the origin of the smoke, when suddenly she heard a sound, a quick rush and whirling of air, followed by a brilliant glow. Spinning around, she saw the blaze burning in the distance, casting off pillars of flames nearly reaching the treetops. Dashing towards her phone, she hurriedly dialed 911. Moments later, the darkness parted as whirling red lights came over the horizon, the scream of sirens meeting the seething sizzle of the fire as it consumed the entire structure in just minutes. As firefighters climbed down from the rig and began running lines to battle the flames, it quickly became clear that this was a bad one. The heat from the fire was so intense they had to keep their distance, the water hammering into the structure seemingly having no effect. Soon, other units would arrive, and before it was all said and done, 5 fire departments were on the scene. Dozens of firefighters worked to subdue the inferno, which seemed to burn harder in spite of the overwhelming flood of water. By now, neighbors were gathering in the street watching the fire, wondering how it had started and if the residents had made it out in time. It was the home of 79-year-old James William Bill Wood and his wife, Kaidena K. Wood, 72. The couple were known as genuinely nice folks who lived a quiet life, enjoying their sunset years with family and friends. Soon, children, grandchildren, siblings, nieces, and nephews were arriving on the scene, having been notified. Panicked, they worried for Bill and Kay, but the fire department wouldn't answer any questions. They couldn't answer any questions until they managed to get the blaze under control. It would take hours, with the flames slowly dying down and subsiding as the morning sun breached the horizon. There, in the light of dawn, the true ferociousness of the fire was seen clearly, a smoldering ocean of ashy puddles dripping and pouring out. What bones of the home remained standing were scorched, smoking beside jagged piles of wood, roof, and floor. Moving into the wreckage, firefighters dug through the remnants in search of any sign of life, though the likelihood of survival for someone trapped inside was nearly nil. Nearly 12 hours would pass before they located a body. Due to the intense heat, they couldn't in that moment identify the victim, and after all of their work was done, they hadn't found anyone else. For police, it quickly became a complicated situation. Was this Bill? Or Kay? Or was this someone else? While those answers would become the basis for the entire investigation, there was one detail which the fire marshal felt was clear straight from that first moment. Whatever had caused that fire was not natural. Someone had set it, and with that arsonist lie the answers they sought. James William Wood was born on Wednesday, August 5, 1931, to parents James and Grace in rural Warren County, Iowa. James, referred to by friends as Bill, grew up in a large family having 8 siblings. Bill spent much of his childhood in Indianola, a city 30 minutes south of Des Moines. Bill's father served in the Second World War while he was in his early teens, and upon his return, Bill would join his father working in farming and well digging. Bill would later follow in his father's footsteps again, joining the army where he would serve in Korea. Upon his return, he became involved in construction, joining the local 67 Iron Workers Union. Bill was a lover of nature, described in his obituary as loving gardening, bird watching, fishing, and hunting. He'd go on to marry, have children, and retire from ironwork, taking up a job at J.W. Perry, a florist, where he would work for an additional 25 years. Kaidena Lozelle was born in Wapello County, Iowa, on Monday, January 16, 1939, to parents Woodrow and Maxine. A bright, intelligent, and caring young woman, Kaidena, or Kay as she was most often known, would go on to have multiple siblings and a rather large family. Not a great deal of information is known about her early years. She pops up in the public record from time to time, but it doesn't give us a great picture of what her life was like or what she did. We do know she went on to marry and have children who became the light of her life. She was a dedicated mother who wanted to provide her children with everything life had to offer. Over the course of more than 70 years, Bill and Kay were separately building lives with their families. Sadly, both would eventually lose their spouses, being widowed in their elder years. I haven't been able to pinpoint exactly when Bill and Kay met, but we do know it was long before they ever considered a relationship. Kay was, reportedly, friends with one of Bill's sisters, and the two families knew one another. They would find comfort, friendship, and eventually love together, growing closer the more time they spent. Then, on July 14th, 2008, 69-year-old Kay married 77-year-old Bill in a small ceremony attended by much of their combined large families. Family members would later describe the couple as deeply in love, joking that they were like teenagers, holding hands and laughing at their own little secrets. The couple bonded over their mutual love of antiques and collectibles, country music, and auctions. Family described them as inseparable, doing everything together and enjoying each moment of it. While Bill was getting well into his late 70s, he continued to work for J.W. Perry arranging flower deliveries, and he showed no signs of slowing down. Bill's manager, Andrew Knott, later described him to the Des Moines Register saying, quote, "He's a saint, a nicer guy you'd never find. He was going to be 80 and he's still working. A very unique individual." End quote. He liked to keep busy, to keep moving, and Kay wasn't the type to just settle down for good either. When they married, Kay moved into Bill's home, located on the west side of Highway R63, 10 miles south of Des Moines and just 4 miles east of Norwalk. The highway could be a busy road, but the area in which they lived is noted as being fairly rural, quiet, which is how the couple liked it. Together, they filled the home with memories, photographs, and mementos of their lives, as well as collectibles and antiques, some of which carried value. While they certainly weren't rich, they had enough to pick up the things they wanted from time to time, and much of the value of their items was in nostalgia and memory rather than cash. Bill owned a Model A Ford, manufactured between 1927 and 1931, which he would drive in local parades, and he had a 1940-style gas pump in the front yard. Kay had an extensive and valuable collection of dolls which she'd been putting together for much of her life. Her own father had worked in antiques. They often entertained, having family over, and everyone was welcome. Kay and Bill didn't note different family lines, giving as much love to their own biological children as they did to each other's children. They were one big family. Kay has been described by friends, family, and neighbors as a sweet, kind, and compassionate woman who always had a nice comment for everyone. Bill's been described as being extremely kind and caring, as well as humorous, with multiple co-workers and neighbors saying Bill often joked around and enjoyed to make others smile. Kay's grandson, Brad Harris, would later explain to the Register, quote, "Kay and William were the most loved people. They are two of the nicest people on the planet." End quote. On Thursday, July 14th, 2011, the couple celebrated their third wedding anniversary, and there was as much love, care, and companionship as there had ever been. Tragically, just 2 weeks later, a ferocious fire would engulf their home, kicking off the dual investigation into a murder as well as a disappearance. No one could have imagined something like this would ever happen, especially not to people like Kay and Bill, yet nearly a decade later, the search for answers continues. It all happened on a seemingly normal day, which kicked off without any indication of what horrors were to come. Saturday, July 30th, 2011 was a hot summer day in rural Iowa with temperatures soaring into the 90s, but that didn't stop Bill and Kay from getting up early and heading out for a big day. There was an auction occurring in Stewart, a city in Lincoln County approximately 45 miles to the west of their home. That morning, the couple climbed into Bill's prized red Chevy Silverado to make the drive and hopefully to help bring back some items they might acquire. The auction itself was advertised as having a lot of antiques and high-dollar items such as jewelry. We know that they made the trip. Witnesses would later confirm seeing both Kay and Bill at the auction that morning, though these would be the last sightings of the couple, taking place around 11 a.m. What occurred over the course of the next 12 hours has never been determined. At approximately 11:30 p.m., multiple neighbors detected the scent of smoke and saw flames rising up from Bill and Kay's home. Several 911 calls came in, and the Northern Warren Fire Department responded. The fire department's located along Highway R63, less than half a mile to the north of the home. And yet, by the time they arrived, less than 4 minutes later, the house was completely engulfed in flames, and the fire was massive enough that 4 other fire departments were called in to assist. The exact time of arrival has been noted as being 11:35 p.m. Due to the intense heat, firefighters couldn't approach the house, and considering how quickly it had spread, it was immediately deemed as suspicious by Brian Vance, both the chief of the fire department and a Des Moines police officer. It wouldn't be until after sunrise that the fire was completely out, with Chief Vance noting the entire home had been destroyed, crumbling in on top of itself as the fire had burned out of control. 3 firefighters had to be treated for extreme heat stress fighting the blaze, according to the register. While neighbors had gathered to watch the horror, members of Bill and Kay's family were becoming aware and began arriving at the scene wanting to know if they were all right. By morning, as the fire department began going through the rubble, more than 40 members of the family had arrived and were desperately awaiting answers. It was during this time that the fire marshal spoke to the family, asking what vehicles the couple drove, and that's when they discovered that Bill's red Chevy Silverado was not at the house. For a time, this gave some comfort. Maybe they hadn't been home when the fire had started, but that hope would quickly turn to grief. At approximately 11:30 a.m. on Sunday, July 31st, firefighters discovered a badly burned body amongst the ashes. At the time, due to the heat of the fire, the body could not be identified and was transported to the medical examiner's office. It was clear from the beginning that this was no random fire and had likely been intentionally set. With the fire department arriving within minutes of the first call, it was out of the ordinary for the blaze to have consumed the home so fully, so quickly. While the fire marshal wouldn't directly go on the record one way or the other, he did tell the media that it was suspicious. Further examination of the scene noted that the origin point appeared to be an enclosed porch area on the east side of the home, and it was possible that the fire had been intentionally set there at that location. Despite a thorough search of the property, only one body was found, which meant either Kay or Bill had not been in the home during the blaze, or perhaps neither had. Much of the information was pending identification by the medical examiner, who would conduct an autopsy the next day. Neighbors were frightened by the fire, believing it was arson. It was highly unlikely random. They lived out in the country, away from much of the population, and it seemed more likely Bill and Kay had been targeted rather than random victims. The investigation would involve multiple agencies, including the fire marshal, the Warren County Sheriff's Office, and the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, or DCI. Throughout much of Sunday, investigators were in the area examining the remnants of the home and surrounding property, while others were going door to door, questioning neighbors about the couple and the night of the fire. There was also the search for Bill's truck, which police hope might shed some light on what had happened and perhaps where they were. The vehicle had been equipped with OnStar, a system which enables GPS and security protocols, and through this service, investigators were able to discover the exact location of the truck, though it presented more questions than answers. Sunday afternoon, investigators from the DCI learned that the truck was parked nearly 200 miles away in Kansas City, Missouri. According to the family, neither Kay nor Bill had any connections to this area, and investigators theorized that the truck had likely been taken by the arsonist, but the timeline would lend further complications to that belief. The vehicle had been left at 8381 North Donnelly Avenue, the Cordillera Ranch Apartments, an upscale luxury apartment complex in an affluent part of town. Police were unsure whether this complex was connected to the suspect or perhaps had been chosen at random. As the truck was being impounded and driven back to the state crime lab in Iowa, detectives began canvassing the area hoping to find anyone who had seen the truck arrive, or better yet, who had been driving it. Several witnesses noted that the truck had been parked in the lot prior to the time that the fire started. This didn't make a great deal of sense to investigators who wondered, had the suspect taken the truck and then returned with a different vehicle before starting the fire, or perhaps had there been more than one person involved in this crime? There was also a theory at the time, which has never been confirmed, that the fire could have been started on a delay somehow. While those answers would not be quick in coming around, police did get lucky in that several witnesses had not only seen the truck arrive, but had gotten a good enough look at the driver that they were brought in to sit with a composite artist. In hopes of gathering more information, detectives would later release statements to the press showing images of the truck and asking anyone who had seen it anywhere between the couple's home and Kansas City between noon on Saturday and noon on Sunday to contact them, as they tried to narrow the timeline but also determine the identity of the driver. On Monday, August 1st, the autopsy was conducted and completed, though investigators at the time were not willing to release any information, not even the victim's gender, saying that they hadn't ruled out whether or not it was Bill or Kay, or possibly someone else. According to the Register at this time, several family members gave DNA samples to assist in identification. While police were working with the truck and canvassing both locations, family members began gathering to conduct their own searches. They started at the home, then slowly began making their way to neighbors' homes, asking permission to search outbuildings and fields. When they learned about the truck being found, the decision was made to drive down there and search along the way. One of Bill's brothers, Henry, explained to the Register, quote, "The truck was found in Kansas City, so we're going to head that way just hoping that maybe they threw something out. We really don't know what we're looking for, just any clue that might be out there. We've got a lot of people here. We're a big family. We thought, let's go out and see what we can do." End quote. Over the course of the next week, friends, family, and volunteers conducted searches all along the highway, the fields and woods surrounding the home, and all major routes to Kansas City. Local businesses donated food, water, and safety vests to assist. In total, more than 100 people were involved in these searches, though law enforcement was not, noting that they had no evidence to give them a direction to look, and they weren't sure that there was anything to be found along the roads or in the wilderness. At the time, the truck was being swept for evidence and the composite sketch was being finalized. On Tuesday, August 9th, more than a week after the fire, police issued a press release which included the composite. The suspect was described as being a white male standing 6 feet 2 inches tall to 6 feet 6 inches, with a slender build and short gray and white hair, believed to be in his late 40s to early 60s. The composite was shown to the family prior to its release, but no one recognized the man. Mike Motzinger of the DCI was put in charge of the case and answered questions from the media when the composite was released. When asked about this person of interest, Motzinger explained, quote, "He was seen walking away from the vehicle. Throughout our investigation and talking with numerous people, this is how we came to know this individual had been associated with the truck." End quote. At the time, not much else was known, and the more investigators found, the less it made sense. How did the fire begin? Was more than one person involved? Who was the man seen with the truck? Why was it parked in Kansas City, and how did he come into possession of it? Investigators hoped the public could provide them with some of those answers, and upon release of the sketch, tips did begin coming in. In order to spread awareness, family members produced flyers showing Kay, Bill, the truck, and the composite, and began plastering them everywhere between the couple's home and Kansas City. The hope was the more people saw the flyers and heard the story, the better the chance someone who might have seen something would come forward. Unfortunately, things would move slowly. On Friday, August 19th, nearly a month after the crime, the DCI officially confirmed that the body recovered from the house had been identified through DNA, and it was Bill's. This was devastating for the family, who adored Bill and couldn't begin to imagine who would want to harm him or Kay. DCI confirmed that Bill's death was being investigated as a homicide, though no one was prepared for his cause of death. According to investigators, Bill had been shot multiple times prior to the fire. They wouldn't release information regarding where he had been shot, though they specified not in the head. Nor would they say the type or caliber of gun used, other than to say that they had not recovered the gun at the scene. Kay was being investigated now as a missing person, as Motzinger explained to the Gazette, quote, "You always have to maintain hope. We're working as if it's a missing persons case. The best scenario is you find her alive. That's what we're still hoping for. Right now, we're looking into all possibilities, but we've received no leads that have taken us in any particular direction. We're hoping, as the investigation goes along, that we can begin narrowing down those possibilities." End quote. Bill's brother Henry and the entire family were heartbroken, and Henry spoke to KCCI News 8, explaining, quote, "It's one thing to think about it, but it's another when somebody comes out and says this is what happened. It really hurt to think, somebody shot my brother. Now we know that he was shot, I guess we find some comfort in that would be better than burning. We hope it was quick. We hope it was painless." End quote. Bill's funeral took place on Friday, August 26th, at the Overton Funeral Home in Indianola. He was laid to rest in Webb Cemetery in Norwalk, where he had lived his last years. He was noted as having 21 grandchildren, 21 great-grandchildren, and 2 great-great-grandchildren. Patty Shaw, Kay's daughter, when asked about Bill's death, replied, quote, "I think in our hearts we were hoping they were together, just because you want that. If they're going to go, you want them to be together." End quote. After Bill was laid to rest, the search for Kay continued in earnest, but as time passed, the hope that they'd find her was beginning to dwindle. The family was frustrated with the lack of progress on the investigation, frustrated with the lack of information that had been shared with them, frustrated that they didn't have a clue where to look for Kay. Theories about what might have happened spread through town in the form of rumor and conjecture, though many people, including some members of the family, thought the crime might be connected to the auction they went to that morning. As Henry explained to KCCI, quote, "I think there's a really big chance that something happened in Stewart. Bill probably has some antiques that are very rare. He liked nice stuff. He probably had expensive stuff. If he found something he wanted, he bought it." End quote. Early on, it was believed that the motive may have been robbery. Perhaps someone had seen Bill and Kay at the auction and saw them make a purchase, or even spoke with them and learned that they had valuable antiques back at their house. For a criminal looking to grab some items to fence, Bill and Kay would likely have been seen as easy targets, a polite, elderly couple who lived in a rural area by themselves. However, when Mike Motzinger was asked about the robbery as a motive, he stated that due to the damage to the home from the fire, it was difficult to know what, if anything, may have been taken. In regard to other theories, he explained, quote, "We have no smoking gun lead out there that has directed us one way versus the other. We're basically having to follow up on all leads." End quote. That summer would sadly come to an end and fall would settle over Iowa without any new answers or information regarding who killed Bill and what might have happened to Kay. In hopes of finding any potential connection to someone who may have wished to harm or rob the couple, police began doing intensive research into their lives, going through their financial records and interviewing friends and family. Motzinger told reporters that the case was being actively investigated and that leads continued to come in. However, as time passed with no developments, the family continued being frustrated by the inability to crack the case. When asked about it, Brad Harris replied, quote, "It kind of seems like they've given up. Maybe they haven't, but we haven't heard anything. I don't blame anyone, but I think there's more that could be done." End quote. The family continued trying to do their own work, conducting additional searches and trying to garner media attention. By October, investigators still didn't know where Kay was or what might have happened to her, nor were they any closer to identifying the man seen at the truck. In hopes of encouraging more tips, the family set up a website where people could donate towards a reward for information. On Monday, October 10th, they held a press conference to announce the website. 1 month later, the initial reward began at $6,000. More tips came in, and investigators were running them down, but everything seemed to lead to a dead end. Soon, time began passing more rapidly, And a year later, in July of 2012, nothing much had changed. Patty Shaw, when asked about the passing of a year, told the Register, quote, "It's been frustrating. It's been a year and there's nothing. You know, you keep hearing rumors and stuff, and that's just not cutting it. You need the answers, and you need why, who, and where. It's tough because you're mourning the death of Bill, and you're still hopeful that the other one may come back. At this point, your hope is starting to really, really dim." End quote. For the DCI, it was still an active investigation, although over a year later, they noted tips were not coming in as quickly as they once had been. Things had slowed down quite a bit, but that didn't mean they weren't trying to find the answers. Motzinger explained to the Register, quote, "We're far from calling it a cold case. Hopefully one tip, one little bit of information will come in and lead us in the right direction. Some cases can go on for years before we get an arrest. Some we get right away. It's not something unusual." End quote. Sadly, in the nearly 10 years that have passed, this is how things have remained. There's been no major revelations, no discussions of new evidence or leads. In July of 2014, 3 years after the crime, investigators again reached out to the public for their help. Motzinger, speaking to the press, explained, quote, "I don't know if the public realizes it's still not solved at this time. So with the 3-year anniversary, we're trying to get it back in the public's eye, and hopefully people will come forward if they have information. This is definitely unique. You don't run across this every time where you find one of the victims and haven't found the other one." End quote. When asked about the rumors of robbery again, Motzinger explained that extensive damage to the house and the items made compiling a list to determine what could be missing very difficult. He explained, quote, "We're following up on that lead. At this time, any theory on what may have occurred is still open to be looked at and investigated. There are still a lot of unanswered questions." End quote. Nearly 10 years ago, James William Bill Wood was shot to death at his home in Norwalk, Iowa, before it was set ablaze. His wife of 3 years, Kaidena Lozelle Wood, has not been seen since the auction that morning in the city of Stewart. When last seen, Kay has been described as being a white female with gray hair and blue eyes, standing 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 128 pounds. Kay has a vertical scar on her abdomen and her ears are pierced. She wears hearing aids in both ears and a braided wedding band with a small diamond. When asked about her mother all these years later, Patty Shaw told WHO News 13, quote, "Every day I think of Mom. I think of the horrific crime that was committed against her and William, and every day the anger grows. Every day I pray that we get the answer." End quote. According to Mike Motzinger, the DCI has received several hundred tips over the past decade and continues to get them, but in much slimmer amounts. Despite the leads, they've yet to determine the identity of the man seen in the composite, nor what his connection to Kay and Bill may have been. While police have remained tight-lipped about the case, they did tell News 13 that they believe that whoever committed this atrocious crime likely knew Kay, Bill, or both of them. It's possible this could have been random, but there's a firm belief there is some connection between the victims and those responsible for the murder and disappearance. Unfortunately for the family, it never ends, and while they continue to try to live their lives, they never stop looking for answers. Michael Harris, one of Kay's children, explained that bleak emptiness, saying, quote, "You don't go anywhere you're not looking. You're riding in the car. If I'm a passenger, my eyes are in the ditch or they're out in the fields. That's going to be our lives. I mean, it is. We are going to be looking for our mother until we find her. That will be our lives. There is nothing in between." A loving, kind, compassionate elderly couple head out to an auction as they've done hundreds of times before. 12 hours later, one of them's been murdered, the home is on fire, and the other is missing. Bill was 79 years old when he was killed, and his home was set ablaze. His 80th birthday came just 6 days later. Kay was 72 when she vanished 10 years ago, a loving mother, sister, and grandmother. For nearly a decade, her family has wondered what became of her, and as time has passed, they've slowly grown to accept the likelihood that she's gone. However, they still long to find her, to give her a proper burial. Somehow, despite the bizarre nature of these crimes, the rural area in which it occurred, and the massive amount of family involved in spreading awareness, the suspect or suspects have remained free and unidentified, perhaps committing more crimes, destroying more families. One thing I can say about this case is information is sparse. There's a lot of articles written in the first 3 or 4 months, but beyond that, they're few and far between. A lot of what occurred that day is unknown, or at least it hasn't been shared, and that adds a lot of frustration. Was more than one person involved? Possibly. How was the fire started? Was there a delay? Were accelerants used, and if so, what kind? We've never gotten an answer on that either. Was Bill killed at the home or elsewhere? Did Kay make it back from the auction, or were the couple attacked before they even got home? Why was the truck found in Kansas City, and who was the man who left it there? These are all truly important questions, and despite investigation, tips from locals, and media attention, they've never been answered. It's a really difficult case to analyze theories on because at the end of the day, there isn't really a solid theory. There's an assortment of possibilities, none of which can be really ruled out or in based on what evidence is public. I'd imagine investigators have quite a bit more than they've shared. They likely know answers to some of these questions I've just asked, but it doesn't appear to have assisted them in regards to solving this case. At no point has a single concise theory been put forth by investigators. They've acknowledged, at least once, that there's a likelihood that Kay, Bill, or both knew the person or persons involved, but that's it. We don't know if robbery was a motive, we don't know if it was random, and we don't know if it was done out of a personal vendetta or at the whim of a psychopath. All we know is that 2 beautiful people were taken away by a monster, leaving their family to suffer with the grief and pain of unknowing and the absence of justice. I think the best way to approach things is to look at what we know, consider the possibilities, and see what fits and what doesn't. Being that we don't know a great deal about Bill and Kay's private life, it's difficult to name a specific person who may have had a grudge or a reason to attack, but we can try. On the morning of Saturday, July 31st, Bill and Kay left home and made the 45-minute drive west to Stewart to attend an auction. From what I've read, while the auction had some lower-priced items, there was a lot of expensive antiques and jewelry there too, the kind of stuff that would draw in a crowd with some money to throw around. We know Bill and Kay made it there, witnesses confirm that. However, once they left, everything becomes unclear as 12 hours later the house is on fire. It's in those 12 hours where all of the answers are. The auction has to hold some of the answers. While I imagine investigators were able to look over information regarding people who placed bids, people who won auctions, and maybe even people who simply attended, they've never spoken much about it or confirmed one way or the other. A lot of people, including much of the family, believes that it was at the auction that Bill and Kay were targeted, either by someone who thought they'd be easy marks and followed them, or perhaps by someone who went so far as to engage them in conversation, learn about what they were into, where they were from, and perhaps most importantly, what items of value they might already possess. There's a good chance people could have attended that auction specifically to select victims who they believed would be wealthy, in possession of valuable items, and who they likely thought couldn't defend themselves. Despite both of their energies and zest for life, somebody in good shape and half their age wouldn't have had difficulty overpowering them, especially if guns were involved, and we know at least one was. Sadly, you can see how Bill and Kay became potential targets, but I don't think anyone's going to waste their time following them home without knowing there's something there worth taking, something to make the ordeal worthwhile. At the same time, we don't know if Bill and Kay bought anything at the auction. That's never been revealed. The sheer act of them purchasing something expensive and driving a nice 2-year-old truck might have been enough for a specific type of criminal. The way I see things, there's two ways it all could have happened. Either Bill and Kay were approached and victimized prior to getting back to Norwalk, or the attack was launched after they got home. So let's begin with them making it home and work our way around. Assuming they left Stewart and went straight home, they should have arrived sometime in the early afternoon between 12 and 3 p.m. That's 11 to 8.5 hours prior to the fire. How their attackers came upon them is a different story, though, and could have involved a number of possibilities. Someone followed them home, someone at the auction befriended them and was going to come over to view their collection, someone arrived that night after they'd gone to bed, or someone was already there waiting for them. There's also the possibility that things could have happened before they got home. Maybe they were followed and attacked along the road or tricked into pulling over. Maybe someone invited them to view a collection or said, "Oh, if you're into this, I have some at home I'd be willing to sell." Anything to get them somewhere isolated. Once that happened, there's a chance Kay was taken as collateral and Bill was driven home to hand over money, items of value, something in exchange for his wife's life, or so he would have been told. It might explain how the truck got to Kansas City before the fire started, and if this is how it went down, you're definitely looking at more than one person. Someone to take Kay, someone to go with Bill. The frustration comes in when you try to analyze motive and we can't really find one. Robbery is considered possible, but without knowing for certain if anything was taken, it's difficult to work with that. I've often wondered if maybe robbery was the plan, but things went south because while Bill and Kay owned a lot of beautiful antiques with high value to them personally, they didn't seem to be buying exorbitantly expensive items. They lived in a manufactured home in a rural area and they didn't wear flashy clothes, big diamonds, and gold. Perhaps someone may have assumed that, thinking they could force them to withdraw money from the ATM or that they might have jewels at the house and then became angry when that wasn't the case. I don't know what their net worth was, but it seems more likely they lived comfortably and could afford to splurge here and there, but they weren't sitting on millions of dollars. To me, it's hard to imagine that Bill was shot and killed in the house while Kay was present, and then she was taken away for reasons unknown. From what we know, there were no attempts to remove money from the ATM, and there was never a ransom situation. I can't imagine why Kay would be taken out of the house unless she wasn't in the house to begin with. It would have been easier for the suspects to commit 2 murders there in the house and then set it on fire than it would be to commit 1 murder, set the fire, abduct Kay, and go elsewhere. Surely it could have been done that way, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Knowing that the fire was set after the truck was already in Kansas City suggests a minimum of 2 people involved, assuming some kind of a delayed device wasn't used. And once you've got 2 people with that distance between them, I think the answers to Kay's fate are likely somewhere in a desolate area between Norwalk and Kansas City, a stretch of nearly 200 miles, which, depending on the route you take, could travel through a lot of wilderness, vacant farmlands, state parks, rivers, and lakes. All along I-35 and I-29, there are exits you can take, and after a few turns, you're in the middle of nowhere. There has been a lot of talk about where the truck was found at these luxury apartments in Kansas City. Some people believe the suspects must have a connection to Kansas City, while others have argued that the complex can be seen from the road and was probably randomly selected. I think it's worth noting this complex is located in the middle of an area where major roadways are intersecting. I-35 running north and south, Route 152 running east to west, I-435 north to south, all within half a mile. Once you leave the truck, there's a lot of different directions to go. It's entirely possible the suspect had another vehicle in the area waiting for him, suggesting this was planned out ahead of time, or perhaps he decided to walk a certain distance and call a cab, or maybe he lived in the area or knew someone who did. Whoever drove that truck was either smart enough to wipe it down and not leave any physical evidence behind, or investigators are in possession of physical evidence but they haven't said so. It seems unlikely they have fingerprints. If they did, I think they'd say that and they'd be in the system. We do know that several items from the truck were taken to the crime lab for analysis, but there's never been any additional information regarding what the items were and what evidence, if any, was recovered. Due to the fire back at the house, whatever physical evidence may have been there was destroyed, and that brings up a good question. What was the purpose of the fire? You know it's going to draw attention, so you'd have to be able to make a quick getaway. Was it done to cover up the murder, cover up a robbery, or something else, or both? Due to the extensive damage, we don't know what, if anything, was stolen. We don't know what items may have been in the home that might carry major value, something which could easily be sold under the table and wouldn't draw attention after the crime. I find it difficult to imagine nothing was taken from the home, but I guess that's possible. Robbery may have been a motive, but there's a chance it wasn't. It's not beyond considering that Bill could have been killed elsewhere and then was placed inside the home before it was set on fire. That fire destroyed everything, including what physical evidence the killer may have left on Bill, from car seat fabric to carpet fibers to DNA and beyond. The only solid evidence were the bullets found in his body, and police won't talk about them. I do find it frustrating that they haven't specified where he was shot and how many shots were fired. 2 shots to the chest seems like you're just killing someone, but 8 shots to the chest, abdomen, and extremities could suggest rage, hate, and psychopathy, but maybe that's part of why they haven't shared it. It's also strange that in an area where people smelled smoke and were close enough to see the fire, they didn't hear any gunshots, let alone multiple gunshots in quick succession. As you can see, so many different angles are possible given what little information is available. So I think the last place to turn our attention is towards what police have suggested, the possibility that Kay and Bill knew their assailant or assailants. They were part of a large family: children, siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins, grandkids, great-grandkids. Bill had lived in the area for the vast majority of his life and had likely come to know a lot of people, and the same could be said for Kay. Now, everyone we know knew them, had nothing but good things to say about them. Overall, they truly sound like they were really nice people who wouldn't hurt a fly. So in terms of people who they have known, a lot of folks have hopped on to speculate family. But here's the problem with that. In a family that big, I find it difficult to believe not one person would recognize that composite if it was someone they were also related to. Not to mention, eventually that person would have to turn up somewhere, right? At the funeral, at the fire department, at a press conference, at a reunion, at a lunch, and you're not going to recognize them then? It's really hard to imagine anyone in the family was involved and has gone this long without slipping up, being recognized, or failing to have an explanation for where they were the day the crime occurred. You know, police would have dug into the family. They always begin there, and yet nothing has ever developed. I've seen in several places online where people have accused Kay of being involved, which is so ridiculous, it would be laughable if it wasn't so sad. I get it. Everyone always jumps straight to the spouse. The spouse must have done it when a crime like this happens, and with Kay having never been found, why not just speculate? Well, several reasons. In order to believe that Kay was involved, you'd have to believe that a 72-year-old woman who was extremely close with her family decided not only to have her husband killed, but was also willing to have her own personal items and antiques destroyed in the fire with absolutely nothing to gain from it. You can't cash in on life insurance or whatever assets Bill may have possessed by disappearing. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it really frustrates me when I see people just flagrantly throwing it out there like, oh, clearly that's what happened. 10 years later, and Kay has never been found, and I find it extremely hard to believe she would have been fine spending her last years on the run, in isolation, with nothing. No car, no money, no family, no access to her own bank account. So if we're not looking at family, then where else is there to look? We don't know much about Kay and Bill and what kind of friends they had. It seems like outside of people Bill knew at work, neither of them was getting together with a large group of friends at any given time. Most of their free time was spent with family, at auctions and antique shows, or at home. I do wonder about other collectors, though. People into similar items, people who frequented auctions, people who may have been envious or jealous of something they had. It makes me wonder, was there someone they used to see at the auctions? A rival maybe, someone they outbid on something, who's always been trying to get the same kind of stuff as them? It's possible. In a way, part of me wonders if the fire wasn't just to cover up the crime, but a last hateful gesture towards the couple. A way of not only taking their lives, but destroying the things they'd spent a lifetime acquiring as well. But that's purely speculation on my part. I'd really like to know if they'd had anyone in their home in the months leading up to their deaths. maybe for repairs, HVAC, etc. Someone who could have stepped inside and, not knowing antiques, may have assumed that these must be worth money and maybe they're worth killing over. Perhaps it's more a matter of the suspect knowing the house and what was there more so than directly knowing Kay and Bill. However, without more information, it's difficult to be able to narrow much down. Also, whoever this person might be, it would appear none of the family knows him, or at least doesn't recognize his face from the composite, and they haven't recognized him or had a flashbulb moment about him in 10 years. So what do you think? Could it be someone close, someone they knew and trusted? Was the auction the core of everything that went wrong that day? Was it random, based on robbery and little else? Or is there something more beneath the surface that's yet to be linked, which might explain more and give some definitive motive? In so many cases, we're left with questions, but this one has a great deal of them, and for the most part, they've never been answered. 10 years later, and almost everything that came out in the first 2 months remains the vast majority of what we know today. I can't begin to imagine the frustration and the pain the family has gone through and continues to go through after all this time. James William Bill Wood was 79 years old. His loving wife of 3 years, Kaidena Lozelle Wood, was 72. They were targeted by monsters, cowards who prey on those who are weaker, who can't defend themselves. While we know what happened to Bill, how his life was taken, we don't know why and we don't know who. For Kay, we know almost nothing. Was she taken from the home for reasons unknown? Was she taken before they got home? Was she alive when the fire began? Or had she been killed before the truck was left in Kansas City? And what of those involved? Have they gone on to commit similar crimes, been arrested and convicted in unrelated matters, or are they still out there walking the streets waiting to terrorize another family? Unfortunately, unless new evidence is found, there's a break in the case or new tips lead to a suspect, the murder of Bill Wood and the disappearance of Kay Wood will remain open, unsolved, and growing cold. If you're looking for more information about the murder of Bill Wood and the disappearance of Kay Wood, the Des Moines Register did extensive coverage, as did KCCI and News 13. The website, iowacoldcases.org, has a lot of great information on this case, as well as many other unsolved Iowa cases, and I highly recommend it. If you have any information about the murder of Bill Wood and the disappearance of Kay Wood, please contact the Warren County Sheriff's Office at 515-961-1122. You can also contact the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation at 641-342-6263. And if you would like to connect with the families, they do have a Facebook page you can find by searching for Find Answers, Bill and Kay Wood Missing Persons Arson Case. What do you believe happened? Tweet me at TraceEvPod, message me on Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com, or comment in the Facebook group. Since Trace Evidence has the most amazing listeners in the world, I wanted to ask you to take a second out of your day and do me a favor. Trace Evidence has been nominated for the Quite the Podcast Awards, and your vote means a lot. Please visit quitethetingsmedia.com/awards-voting. I'll put a link in the show notes, and there's already one on social media. There, you can cast a vote for Trace Evidence in the True Crime section. I truly appreciate your vote because the more ears find Trace Evidence, the greater our ability becomes to share these cases and hopefully help find justice for the victims. Trace Evidence would not be possible without support from amazing listeners like you. And now I'd like to take a moment to thank our fantastic Patreon producers: Alicia Lorraine, Anne Bertram, Aurora K, Bacon Bits the Cat, Brittany Bivens, Christine Greco, Krista Colvin, Dave Allen, Denise Dingsdale, Diane Dyson, Eric Sumter, Guillermo Pinto, Heather Louise, James, Jen Trebb, Jennifer Winkler, Joni Berkowitz, Kara Moreland, Marla Wright, Melissa Brackisen, Nick Mohar Schurz, Orange Patches, Quinn McBreen, Roberta Jansen, Sarah Levonen, Sarah Mascaritolo, Sarah Lyons, Travis Skepko, Stephanie Joyner, Stephanie Eve, Tom Archer, Tom Radford, Tracy Woods, and Walter Jansen. Your contributions to Trace Evidence are invaluable, and your support of the show is both appreciated and extremely humbling. If you're interested in supporting Trace Evidence and gaining access to exclusive merch and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/traceevidence or go to trace-evidence.com and click on the support option. That's going to conclude this week's episode. If you haven't already, please consider rating the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. 5 stars would be greatly appreciated, but it's up to you. Share these episodes, spread the word, and maybe together we can help bring justice to those who have been deprived of it. Thank you all once again for listening, supporting the show, and for being the best listeners a podcaster could ask for. I want to thank you for listening to this episode and for everything you do to support Trace Evidence. As you can tell, my voice is almost back to normal. You'll probably pick up on a couple things throughout the episode where it's a little scratchy here and there, but we're getting there, so I appreciate your patience with me this past week when I couldn't record like I wanted to. So, thank you all once again for listening, and I hope you'll join me next week for another unsolved case on the next episode of Trace Evidence.